Entrance of the Ptolemaic king, Christos Erephos. Who is working hard to make us want to restore Ptolemaic Alexandria with great success. We begin the afternoon session.
Thank you, Kostas. Just to remind you of the time allotted to each talk, please, and to tell you that the proceedings will be published. We have had a discussion very preliminary with Dr. Kenawi, and we will continue with a decent publisher. They will be reviewed, of course, and you'll be informed, the authors and presenters will be informed on the future of that procedure. Thank you very much. Kostas.
Thank you, Christos. Thank you very much. And the only thing which I request is that you and all your others, timekeepers, will have mercy on us, because we are not starting on time. We are starting 35 minutes late. So please take that into account and do not consider us responsible for the first 35 minutes of delay. I want to say that the first speaker, Paolo Vitti, who has a very, very distinguished Italian father, and his mother is Greek, is both a friend and one of the 2 or 3 architect conservators whom I most admire in the world. It has been my privilege as the senior vice president of Europa Nostra to hand him 2 medals. One for research, his superb work of research on Roman brick building techniques in the Peloponnese, and the ways in which it was in fact technically innovative. And the other, the superb restoration of the Armenian church, which is actually a medieval building. It looks like a Western medieval building, but it belongs to the Armenians, in Nicosia, Cyprus, just on the other side of the Green Line. So having seen his work and having appreciated in Europa Nostra his immense knowledge, his very wide and simultaneously very deep knowledge, I cannot think of anybody more suitable to discuss and explain to us one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, an architectural wonder, which is, of course, the Pharos of Alexandria. So I would normally just simply ask Paolo Vitti to start speaking, but I have been asked by my co-chair that he wants to create a little trouble. Mr. Abad.
I wouldn't go. I quite contest the title of his presentation, Professor Vitti, gigantic and structurally sound. I think it collapsed. How can it be sound when it collapsed, in the 14th century? I'm sure you have some very good explanation for that title, considering that I come from a country where most of our monuments are built in granite. And I would imagine that they were more structurally sound than a limestone structure of that height and that. But it was definitely one of the great structures of the world, even at its time. And I'm sure now the Arabs of the Gulf are building higher buildings and probably more structurally. I don't know if they're structurally sound as the lighthouse of Alexandria. Probably they are just as unsound.
If those buildings that are being built now last 1,600 years, I shall be surprised, but I won't be around to be surprised. Paolo, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So the chairs are very balanced. One is an apotheosis, the other is critical, so it's good. I would say that, of course, yes, so that's perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, really, it's a hard task to talk about something that doesn't exist. And since my studies usually are based on first-hand information, in this case, I could not do this with the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Nevertheless, I will try and I will do an attempt to analyze something that has been compared quite often to the lighthouse that are some minarets that are in the Western Islam. So through this comparison, I would try to make some thoughts on the structure of the lighthouse. Well, this should work. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Okay, so thank you. We have, of course, reconstructions, and not to say that the one that was made by Tirsch is an excellent work, which has gone through many points, and actually it remains the most valuable reconstruction of the exterior of the lighthouse. But there are some question marks. The question marks, for my point of view, regard the way such an amazing structure was built. So how it was possible by the early 3rd century, to realize such a gigantic structure with the building techniques that were known by the time, which really were not Roman concrete. And the second point, of course, is the point of the sources. Do we have enough sources to understand through the sources how was the interior of the lighthouse? And as you can see in this reconstruction, we see a building that is everything but an Hellenistic construction filled with vaulted chambers. So as you know, the construction dates to early 3rd century BC. We know that it lasted at least to the middle 14th century. So yes, I should say that was well done, the work, because it resisted such a long time, of course, with repairs. And we cannot say that without maintenance, any building can stand up for more than a couple of 100 years. And today is a couple of decades. And we know, of course, that in 1350 it has failed and had collapsed. We also know most of our information comes from the Arabic descriptions, which are one of the most important sources of information about the lighthouse. And we are based, when we talk about the lighthouse, we start from reading what they were describing, how it was the exterior and how was the interior. So this, and especially Tirsch, made a strong effort to find traces of the lighthouse in later architectures, and namely in the minarets, which are towers and sometimes are very high towers. So I will base now my analysis on 3 outstanding towers that were built in during the Almohad dynasty. That is to say, exactly in the period that we have some of the most important literary sources descriptions for the lighthouse. You know that the Almohads, they conquer Marrakesh in 1147, and one of the most important mosques is the one of the library of the Kutubiyya. And by that time, they built this mosque and one of the highest minarets that is entirely preserved till nowadays. And then we have the conquest of Al-Andalus that happens some years later, and then we have another masterpiece of construction, which is the well-known Giralda in Sevilla. And to complete this series of buildings and coming to the end of the 12th century, we have the start of another impressive tower, which is the one in Rabat, the Tur Hassan, which was never completed. One of the most interesting descriptions published by Assin Palacios in early 20th century is this description by this architect who came from Malaga, passing through Alexandria, spending one whole year in Alexandria, and making measurements, surveys, very precise, and descriptions of the lighthouse. The architect, so since this description comes from an architect, we can say that there is an understanding and an interest, particular interest, for the description of such a masterpiece as the lighthouse. So he visits Alexandria in 1165, and he measures the lighthouse, he describes, and just to compare, the Kutubiyya was built 7 years earlier, and the Giralda had to be built some 20 years later. So he writes this description exactly in the moment where they were creating other very tall towers, and we can say structurally sound because they are still preserved to nowadays. So the point is, were these minarets influenced by the architecture of the lighthouse of Alexandria? These are the three. I have been visiting these three minarets in the last 6 months. So just I wanted to be sure that what I'm going to say, at least I could rely on something that I could see by person and not by descriptions. And the first one is the Kutubiyya. The Kutubiyya is even the highest of all of them is 55 meters. The measure is only the lower part of the minaret, that is to say, without the top of the smaller part which is on the top. The base has a width of 12, 13 meters, let's say. So there is a ratio of 1 to 4.3 between the base and the height. As you can see, the system is based on a spiral ramp that goes around to the top. As you see from the plan has its solid masonry. It is built with ashlar masonry and bricks. Bricks are used mainly for the vaults and the upper part of the structure. And we have the core, and this is the important point, the core of this minaret is made of full masonry except from 7 chambers which can be accessed while rising up to the top. So there is these rooms are still visible. They can be accessed, but they are along the circuit going up to the top. This is a couple of pictures to show how it is. This is the uppermost part. And this is the pavilion vault that is brick in the top of the Kutubiyya. Then we have the Giralda. The Giralda is an impressive tower. Today, what we see, the upper part is built after 1560. So it's a later addition. Here we have original height of around 51 meters. The width is around 14 meters. So again, we have the same ratio between the base and the height of the tower. Again, a spiral staircase with 6 chambers, which can be accessed while going up to the top of the tower. And we have basically mortar brick masonry. A couple of pictures. This is the last part of the ramp, which supposedly is later built in later period. And then we have the Tur Hassan, which was to be the most impressive one. Actually, today is high only 46 meters, but it was supposed to be as high as 80 meters, and has a wider base, 16 meters, and 16 meters is a lot, and compared to the height. And actually, the present-day ratio is very tough, is 1 to 9.2, but the hypothetical one was 1 to 5. It is, again, with the same model as the Kutubiyya. The Giralda and the Tur Hassan are inspired by the model of the Kutubiyya. And it's dimension stone with bricks on the outside, as you can see. This present day, the remains of the unfinished mosque, and this is one of the sail vaults inside. The ramp rising up, the cross vaults at the corners. And so this is a comparison between the 3 minarets and the lighthouse of Alexandria. So we have that the Kutubiyya, as we said, let's remember the 3 ratios between the base and the height, and consider the Alexandria lighthouse. If we get the base, which is 30 meters, and we get the height of the 2, because the lighthouse of Alexandria was divided in 3 parts. Of the 2 parts, we have a ratio of 1 to 3.5. But if we consider the core of the lighthouse, and so we have only 16 meters at the base, we come to a very slender construction, which is 1 to 6.5. I make this point because this is crucial for the understanding of the structural concept of the lighthouse of Alexandria. The similarities are all the towers had a spiral ramp. We know very well also from the lighthouse, and we know that Idrisi, he makes the point. He says, in the minarets, we have the same system to go on the top through a spiral ramp. And all the towers had a square base, and there were windows used to give light to the spiral ramp. Now, there are more than similarities, there are differences. And the differences, of course, are based on the Arabic descriptions, which give us an understanding of how the lighthouse was. We have the volume of the tower under the lantern is divided in 2 parts instead of being only 1. The square base, we know from the description of Ibn al-Sa'i, that had a pyramidal shape, so it was like a buttressing element. And if we look to, of course, to the dimension of the tower, it's much bigger. But if we look to the core of the Alexandria lighthouse, which I suppose to be octagonal, and we are going to see why I suppose it was octagonal. It's an assumption, of course. we can see that the core of the tower is much similar to the dimension, at least, of the Tur Hassan. But the most crucial point is that the Alexandria Lighthouse had to be built with dry masonry, which is what comes out from the evidence that is underwater. But another very important point that is very well described in our sources is they say, oh, at the very center of this, there is a hollow element, like a well. And this element is really very untypical, because if we compare to the minarets, where we have these chambers, one above the other, in this case, we have something completely different. This is a proposal for the reconstruction of the interior of the lighthouse based on the descriptions. So we know, I skip on the part that entered. We had the entrance that was at a higher level. Then the descriptions say that there was a ramp to access to a first level, where suddenly they say, and then we perceived that the center of the lighthouse was empty. And this spiral ramp, of course, was very useful because it could make possible to go up to the very top, also with animals. But it was also very useful, we have to think about also this point, that under construction, such an important building that was built on the rocks close to the shore, it could have been very easy to access along the construction to the higher part of the tower that was being built through the ramp. So the ramp becomes a very easy way to address the problem of the construction site. Then the hollow core at the very top, it's something that was very important also for the aims of the construction. There are 2 points. The ashlars, the dimension of an ashlar, which can be like, for instance, in the docks of Hellenistic docks in Rhodes, it's more or less the weight is 1 ton. 1 ton is impossible to be elevated other than with cranes. So in this sense, the spiral ramp could not be used. So there was the necessity of something to lift up. It could be done outside, but it could be much easier to do it from inside. And then, so the ramp becomes something that is useful only for the aims of the masons going up and down. But then, again, we have to consider that the lifting of materials was also an important issue when the tower was completed, because we know there was the fueling of the combustible, there was the problem of bullets for catapults. I was very pleased to see that in the sea there are catapults that are found, because, of course, this was a defense tower also. So we have to consider also these points, and then, of course, other elements that were necessary to be lifted. So I have the feeling that at the moment they decided to, the concept of the construction, this was intended to be a very, very high tower, as high as 105 meters, with an octagonal form. The octagonal form can be possibly connected to the fact that, as in the Tower of the Winds in Athens, it shows the direction of the winds. From the example of the Giralda, where we have the statue of the faith that you know is a turning statue, we can assume that why not also on the top of the lighthouse, there was a possibility for the sailors to see the direction of the winds while approaching to the port. So the idea of the octagonal form as a tower was a good one, maybe. But it had to be buttressed because it was too high, too slender, and at this point, the lower part becomes this pyramidal shape, which is a strong buttress that keeps the tower up. So I think that these are the basis of the construction. And just to understand what we are talking about, gigantic in the Hellenistic time, if addressed under the construction point of view, means full solid masonry. And here we have a building that has a hollow in the center. So this is the amazing part of the construction. And for this reason, I say it was structurally sound. To compare and understand the building techniques. So let's go to Rhodes, which of course is contemporary. We have amazing evidence of construction techniques for the defense, Hellenistic defense. And I had the chance to visit this fortification during the winter, and I was amazed by the quantity of dimension stone used for the towers. This is, of course, the part of the defense which divides the two of the three ports. And here we have nothing but a tower of 20 by 20 at the very end point of the fortification. What is that tower? I think it was a lighthouse. So this 20 by 20 is more than the minarets that we have been discussing. So it had to be a very high and tall construction. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the construction. We see only the lower part of the construction is made all of dimension stone. And we know that similarly, the lighthouse was built by dimension stone. Of course, we have granite, but possibly the construction itself was made with the local white calcareous tuff. And we know from the literary sources and from the evidence that Professor Amperel has shown that there is a lot of iron and lead that was found. So for sure, the system of construction was not the one we see in the fortifications of Rhodes, where we don't have dowels and clamps, but had to be reinforced to make it more structurally sound. And so we have also from the literary sources this understanding. So this is a joke, I know. Yeah. So St. Peter's and the Pantheon, just masterpieces of architecture, and to understand what we are talking about. So which was the expertise for that person to achieve such and accomplish such an incredible construction? We don't know. But what we know is another lighthouse that has been built in the Roman times is completely different. So I came to the point. The concept of the lighthouse of Alexandria was truly special, particular. It was not copied by the minarets. The building technique itself was different, so mortar masonry against dry masonry. For understanding the minarets, we have to go to Roman lighthouses, like the one in La Coruña in Spain. What we see today here is, you see this is the reconstruction, the later reconstruction, and you see this cornice. Actually, this cornice, this is the plan. This cornice is the memory of a spiral ramp going up around the core of the tower, which was made with chambers, as you see, with a cross wall in the center. but originally it was much larger. So I truly believe that the minarets and the Arabic sources were admired by something that they completely could not repeat. Thank you very much.
I think now we're going to go for our next speaker. Sorry? Mike, okay. Our next speaker is Anne-Marie Gumier-Sorbet, professor of Greek archaeology and art history at the University of Paris West in France. Since I've been labeled as a troublemaker, I would like to ask her if she has translated the title of her presentation from French.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
And my English is very bad. I'm so sorry, but I do what I can. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizer and sponsor for this fantastic, very interesting colloquium. So thank you. When the Greeks, and particularly the Macedonians, settled in Alexandria, they brought with them their beliefs in afterlife, as it is witnesses in their funerary architecture and iconography. The representation of the dead is made on sculptured or painted stelae, which marked the location of their tombs, which finds them in the early necropolis of Alexandria, such that of Chadbi. In Alexandria, new funerary modes are developed in order to host the dead of the vast metropolis. Each underground loculus is sealed by a plaque or by a pile of blocks, the surface of which is plastered and painted after each burial. In Alexandria, and as in Greece, we encounter the same types of representation. I go fast because you know that, but it's useful, I think, to remember that. So where your banquet, here you recognize the facade of Macedonian tomb at Agios Athanasios, or the same times, more simply, on sculpture or painted stelae and plaque in Greece, in Alexandria, and in Alexandria. Or the same, the man with his servant or his squire. A woman with her maid in Greece, in Alexandria. Spouses binding farewell to each other. The shutting slab of the loculus clearly represents both the doors which separate the dead from the living and the stelae set up before them. It is on this stele that is depicted the husband bidding farewell to his departed wife. Another theme well known, a mother with her child or children. A child with his pet, frequently a bird and a small dog in Greece, in Alexandria. Macedonian stelae had been influenced by Attic prototype. The Alexandrian stelae borrowed the same iconographic type, be it on sculptured stelae or on painted plaque, which were certainly less expensive, but allowed the relative of the deceased to express the same kind of tribute. In the Greek world, the warriors, by their bravery, obtain the status of heroes, which secures for them an afterlife of bliss in the company of the gods. The privileged status is depicted, you see it, on the facade of the Tumulus Bella tomb at Vergina. The dead, a warrior, is being crowned by a tall feminine figure probably Nike. Above the central door of the main facade in the Hypogeum 1 at Mustafa Kamel necropolis of Alexandria, 3 Macedonian horsemen, accompanied by 2 feminine figures, make a libation on altars. The heroic status of the warriors is thus highlighted, and the scenes recall the libation in honor of the dead performed by the living on the altar located in the center of the courtyard. At Vergina, as in Alexandria, these explicit representations are part of cult due to the hero and confirm that his privileged status. In Greece, as in Alexandria, this privileged status extend to a wider category of dead with the hope of felicitous afterlife in the company of the blessed. These representations are performative or active, if you want, what the living wished for their dead, and in the same time, they help the deceased to obtain the new status after their death. The land of the blessed is described by Homer as a pleasant, bright, shadowed, fresh, airy, and fertile place. In Alexandria, and more generally in pharaonic Egypt, this is represented in shape of a garden. And, as you see, in the tomb 5 of Anfushi, which date from the Ptolemaic period, the deceased was lying under a painted canopy set up in a garden, as it can be seen here in a funerary chamber on the left and in a loculus on the right. On 2 shot-in plaque from locally kept today in the Museum of Alexandria University, the painter aimed at expressing both the architectural frame which separates life from death and the deceased placed behind open doors in an open and bright setting. It is a garden under a blue sky where trees grow, a sure sign of fertility. On the first plaque, a child, a boy, is playing with his bird and his dog, which is quite frequent, as you've seen before. We can see also the architectural frame painted in perspective and the trees which grows in the abode of the blessed. And on another plaque, which is incomplete but can be completely restored, one can see a woman with 2 children. The inscription formulates the farewell to these 3 deceased persons. In the same architectural frame, seen in perspective, the woman and the 2 children are placed behind open doors in a garden where trees grow in the background. The study of this painted plaque is being carried out in collaboration with Professor Mona Agag. And in this painted document, we see that how the Alexandrians have adapted types inherited from Greece, adapting them in order to better express their belief in a blissful afterlife represented in the shape of a pleasant garden. We come back to Kamel Shugafa you see this morning. In the Roman imperial period, Alexandrian society did not make much difference between Greeks and Egyptians who widely intermarried. The same blending is attested in the expression of beliefs on afterlife. It can be seen in the painted iconography of two tombs in the necropolis of Kom el-Shugafa, dating from the end of the 1st or the beginning of the 2nd century AD. As you've seen this morning, the paintings fade away and were nearly vanished when Dr. Jean-Yves Empereur discovered them. It became possible to see more with ultraviolet light and with special treatments made by André Pell, photographer in the Centre d'études Alexandrine, on high-resolution digital images. The two tombs with a sarcophagus and a niche carved in the rock have a similar iconography, even if they were executed by two different painters. In each niche, the three walls are divided in two registers. The painting of the upper register is Egyptian, while the lower one is of Greek style. You recognize here the embalming of Osiris by Anubis and the abduction of Persephone by Hades. We have no time to see all this image in detail, and I will summarize the theme. I begin with the Egyptian register. On the central wall, you see the traditional scene, the mummy of Osiris lying on a lion bed embalmed by Horus, under the protection of Isis and Nephthys. On the left wall, I don't know, it's said in English. Okay, thank you. With an ibis head, holds out an image of Falcon, Horus, to his mother Isis. Horus, as pharaoh, will follow his father as ruler of the earthy world, and Osiris, who stands in the center of the scene, will live on through his son and successor. On the right wall, mummified Osiris stands between two divinities seated on thrones. He is now and for eternity the ruler of the land of the dead. The meaning of these images is clear. After the mummification, the deceased will survive as Osiris with the dead and as Horus with the living. Now we go to the lower register, the Greek one. On the left wall, Persephone is picking flowers with Athena, Artemis, Aphrodite, as well as Eros. You recognize Athena, and here Aphrodite with Eros. As in the Ovid text, Metamorphosis, Aphrodite, goddess of love, is asking to Eros not to let Persephone remaining a virgin as Athena and Artemis. Then Eros is preparing to shoot an arrow to Hades. It's a continuous narrative. In the right part, we arrive in the central wall, you recognize. In the right part, the abduction of Persephone by Hades on his chariot with 4 horses. On the left, Artemis and Athena try to fight against the rape. But Aphrodite remains unperturbed by the event she has provoked. On the right wall, after her abduction, Persephone becomes the wife of Hades, and they sit enthroned as ruler of the underworld, the entrance of which is guarded by Cerberus. Hermes, the god of travel and dangerous journeys, had been watching over Persephone's passage into the underworld. He will do the same for the dead initiated, who will be gathered in close to Persephone. The three Greek panels create a continuous narrative that express, through the myth of Persephone, belief, it expressed belief in a happy life and in the world beyond. On the pillars lies, on the pillars you see the head of Beth, the Gorgoneon, and the standard bearer. They are protecting the dead. The dead is lying under the ceiling, painted with an evocation of garden of the pleasant afterlife, with flowers, garlands, multicolored bird, and a peacock in the center. You see the other one. Egypt in imperial time was multicultural, and people fully recognized the powers of the gods, whether Greek or Egyptian. In the world of polytheism, these powers can be expressed simultaneously in several forms, and the two religious systems both recognized as effective. Therefore, it was certainly to combine the effect of that a strong belief in joyous immortality was expressed in the same tombs by the myth of Persephone and Osiris. If you want more explanation, the book is now published in French and in English. As you see, the work was done, and we continue always with Dr. Mervat Seyfeldin. To conclude, I want to thank the Centre d'études Alexandrine and the Egyptian colleague in collaboration of which all these studies are done, colleagues from university or from the Supreme Council. And I thank you for your attention to my bad English. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for your very enlightening presentation. You are going to...
You're not going to introduce.
I'm going to introduce you. I can't not introduce you. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Mona Haggag. She's a professor of archaeology at Alexandria University and president of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria. It gives me great pleasure to present Mona, who's a very dear and old friend. And she chairs now the Archaeological Society, which was probably one of the oldest societies, archaeological societies in this part of the world, in Alexandria. And it was created by a group of people, civil people who are interested in archaeology. So we have a tradition of interests in archaeology as far as Alexandrian culture is concerned. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Let me first express my feeling of being privileged, of being here among you with such a group of distinguished speakers and honorable audience in a very perfectly organized conference like this one. And I want to thank each and everybody who was behind my presence here. So thank you. Actually, although in spite of the repeated number of passages which reached us from literary sources praising the beauty and magnificence of Hellenistic Alexandria and its buildings, none of those buildings remained to us. And the past 2 centuries witnessed the discovery of a huge number of architectural elements that are parts of ruinous buildings from Hellenistic times in different locations of the ancient districts of the city. In spite of the fragments that we do not know their specific provenance other than having been discovered in Alexandria, a majority of fragments were found in places that do not give any details about their context. Very few pieces are well documented in certain buildings that once had parts of their foundation reserved in situ, but again, we do not know the ground plans of these buildings, and we do not know the parts from which those fragments came. Those buildings actually, some of them or some of the areas of the finds indicate buildings of monumental nature. And some of the moldings that remained from such buildings indicate also that they were fitted in a general large scheme of decorative architectural elements. Three intriguing works dealt with this repertoire of architectural fragments written by Patrizio Pensabene and two books by Barbara Kachov about Komildeka finds mainly. And recently, or in 2015, Sarah Mustafa has delivered her MA to the Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies, and she tackled the cataloging and studying of moldings, only moldings. This paper actually is a re-investigation of such moldings from 2 points of view. The first is the concept of an Alexandrian contribution to Hellenistic architecture in order to respond positively or negatively to the most disputed term of Theodor Schreiber, the pan-Alexandrianism. And the second point of view is the prominent appearance of Egyptian elements in Alexandrian moldings. Actually, the pieces, some of the pieces still maintain their stucco covering and some parts of their paintings. In addition to fragments that came from areas of civil architecture, there are some of them came from the well-known cemeteries of the city, from old cemeteries of the city. But apart from those pieces from the cemetery, the majority of the fragments express the Alexandrian daily life and public life, not death. The finds came mainly from the royal quarter of the city and from Komildeka area, as our honorable colleague, Dr. Gregory Majerik, has been speaking in this morning. They came from 3 areas mainly of the royal quarter. One is, one is the northernmost insula here, which is an area called Chantier Politi, and they discovered a huge building which is usually called in literature the Great Stoa of Alexandria, and another area to the south, directly to the south, which is called Chantier Fini, and it is a group of constructions which are later in date than those of the Stoa building, which is dated to the time of Ptolemy III. And the third area of the royal quarter is the repertoire of blocks which Dr. Jean-Yves Empereur spoke about this morning. They are lying underwater around the citadel of Qaid Bay, and most of them, there is actually a good report about them, but they are still not reachable to be studied. The area of Komildeka passed. I don't know how to bring it back, the slides, but I'll try. Box. The box, the small box. No, the other one. The other one. There is no green color here. Ah, the other box here. Okay, thank you. The other area is Komildika area, which is outside the periphery of the Basileon, or the royal quarter, but actually the pieces are very valuable in such a kind of study. These are the pictures of the discovery of the great Stoa of Alexandria. It is a very huge building which has colonnades, two-storied colonnades made of marble and limestone, and they are dated by Hefner with good proofs that they are dated to Ptolemy III. They constitute Doric friezes and Ionic friezes, as you can see, but they indicate very clearly that the Alexandrian architects at that time were working according to the norms of Greek architecture, of Hellenistic, in the mainstream of Hellenistic architecture, and they did nothing over that. The Komildika area, the domicile area, which was abandoned by the end of the 2nd century, also give an idea about the canonical Doric and Ionic architecture of Alexandria, although the huge size of the blocks and the use of stucco coating caused large dimensions of architectural elements in Alexandria with simply articulated profiles. But all of these, in addition to what has been known from the tombs, the existing tombs, and the tombstones, we can form a general idea about Alexandrian particularities in Doric and Ionic orders. This Stoa building has parts which were unfinished, and we have the normal two fasciae architrave in Ionic, which was the general Hellenistic setting for Ionic architraves, and the elongated dentils with wide VI. Now, the early tombs of Alexandria, Alabaster tomb, Shabbi tomb, and Mustafa Pasha, were all mainly Doric in order. But in Mustafa Pasha, we can notice some particularities. The columns are very high, and relatively the diameter is small, which resulted in wide intercolumniations. And the north and south friezes of the court, the main court of Mustafa Pasha tomb 2, has, as you see, 3 triglyphs in each intercolumniation, while the east and west friezes have 2 triglyphs in each intercolumniation. This variation in arrangement may be used in order to give access, wide access, to the rooms behind the north and south friezes of Mustafa Pasha, the chamber tombs, the burial tombs of the tomb itself. And it is noticeable that the reconstruction by Trier University did not notice this difference in arrangement of triglyphs, and it has to be corrected. It is more proved with the huge peristyle tomb in Mustafa Pasha again, and I usually prefer to call it Rodievich Bonakaza, the 2 discoverers of the tomb, that has 2 triglyphs in each intercolumniation. The Mustafa Pasha tomb 1 also has an attic wall instead of the pediment, and this never happened in Greek architecture. This is Alexandrian. There is a kind also of illusionistic inclination in the Doric entablature of Mustafa Pasha. It is noticeable that the lower side of the architrave and the piers turn inward to give a sense of depth. This happened before the time of Mustafa Pasha in the tomb stele of Helixo from Hadra, Izbet Makhlouf, which also gives the example of the earliest coffers ceiling in Alexandria. The group of Chantier Fini give us more variations in Doric and Ionic. They give us the modillions of which are we are going to speak about, which are typical Alexandrian invention, and variations also in dentils and the spaces between them. Chantier-Feny yielded also some stucco decorations, which were mainly used instead of the stone pieces in their places, and they give a lot of variation in decorative motifs and patterns with egg and tongue, with Lisbian leaf pattern, and with the guilloche pattern, as you see. The dentils, as mentioned by Vitruvius, should have the height corresponds to the depth. The width should equal half of the height, while the distance between dentils should equal half or 2/3 of the width. Such a canonical ratio did not happen in Alexandria except in this example in Mustafa Pasha Hypogeum III. Other dentils from Alexandria varied very much in their ratios, but the most repeated one is the elongated dentils with very wide, narrow VI between them. The most distinctive type of Alexandrian dentils is the square dentils, which have the VI corresponds to the width of the dentil itself. So the VI are exactly like the width, and the dentils are square. The examples are in Anfushi 2 and Anfushi 5, room 4. We have a lot of fragments actually with these Alexandrian square dentils from Komildika, especially with segmental pediments, which are actually Egyptianizing and with Egyptian decorations. These square dentils happened all over the Hellenistic times. We have examples from the 3rd century, from Shadbi tomb, examples from the 2nd century, from Mex. Unfortunately, this loculus slab has been destroyed directly after its uncovering decades ago. But these dentils, square dentils, Alexandrian dentils, are used in an Hellenic or Hellenistic atmosphere of decoration, the garlands and all these things. In the 1st century, the same dentils, the square dentils with the same VI, are used with an Egyptian atmosphere of decoration. Mixing Doric and Ionic was a general Hellenistic feature in architecture in all Hellenistic centers, but Alexandria added Corinthian to such a mixture. The Corinthian is mixed with the Doric here in Shadbi and with the Ionic in Shadbi A and B. The Corinthian is also mixed with other orders in Mustafa Pasha tomb and Gabbari tomb. But the major characteristic of Alexandrian moldings is the modillions. The modillions are projections in the soffit of the corniche supporting and decorating it. And they are of two kinds. The first kind is rectangular modillions with a central groove, and the other type is the square hollow modillions, but we do not know which of the two types preceded the other. Modillions from Chantier-Feny give us an example of alternation between the two types at the same corniches. And from the last, 2nd, early 1st centuries, we have this alternation between square and rectangular modillions, the same in the 1st century BC to early 1st century AD. And we have other variations with modillions like diamonds or coffers from tombs and from also secular buildings. Variations also happened in the upper and lower moldings, on top of the modillions or below the modillions. But the usual setting was the chima recta and strip in the upper moldings and the flat ovolo and strip in the lower moldings. It is Judith Mackenzie who first referred in her valuable monograph about Alexandrian architecture to the origin of modillions as influenced by the roof beams of the ceilings of Egyptian tombs, giving an early example in the rock-cut tombs of Deir Rifa dated to the 12th century, but actually I didn't visit Deir Rifa, and this is not, I cannot use it as an example, but I can use Bani Hassan, which is more famous and more frequented. They have these modillions in the ceiling beams. And there are some blocks which incorporate direct Egyptian elements from cemeteries as well as from secular buildings. We have the sphinxes from Mustafa Pasha, which are Egyptian element, of course. We have the sun disk in Shadbi and in Gabari, which are also, which is Egyptian, directly Egyptian. But we have these pieces which are really interesting because they are blocks with the decoration of Hadhr's capital. The two types of Hadhr capitals, the sistrum type, Naiskos, alternated with a type of an entrance with cobra crowned with a solar disk and stylized palmettes in the third one. We have 3 cobras in place of the triglyphs in Hippogeion II Gabari Tir's tomb. The Cavetto corniche is also Egyptian in origin, and we have this piece from the second half of the 2nd century. It happens usually with arched corniche, and it never occurred in Greek rectangular, triangular pediments. This, it seems that segmental pediments, which have their origin in Egypt, incorporating friezes and corniches molded in the Alexandrian style, were the nucleus for the Alexandrian architects to produce more various and unprecedented forms for their external and internal facades. Those new forms are looked at by modern scholars as Baroque architecture. We have examples of curved pediment and entablatures attested in fragments, and we have this very interesting example of a concave entablature. You notice the curve here. So this is one of the 2 projecting parts of a concave entablature, a facade of a niche or something like that. Broken entablature with broken pediment was inspired from the broken lintel in Egyptian temple entrances, of which the earliest example we know is the entrance of the great temple of Aten at Amarna. Egyptian-style Ptolemaic temples in Upper Egypt used broken lintel, but a lamp from the 2nd century BC from Alexandria or environs depicts a temple of Aphrodite. And Aphrodite has an Egyptianizing temple with broken pediment, with Hadhr's head instead of the capitals, with the sun disk, and with the frieze of the Uraeus. Broken pediments are occurred actually in many other places like the Chantier Fini and Qom el Dikka area. Gabari area has, when the modillions or the dentils are oblique and trapezoidal in shape, that means that the pediment was curved in a way or another. Actually, there are many details of comparing the fragments with the tombs and the tomb stele. But in order to save time, the comparison proves the following conclusion. During the early decades of the foundation of the city, Greek architects were commissioned by the kings to construct the required edifices of the new city of Alexandria. The material available in hand, which is the fragments, the repertoire of fragments, they are hundreds, prove that those architects have worked according to the norms of classical canons to produce buildings in the mainstream of Hellenistic architecture. The 3rd century Alexandrian architecture, both funerary and civil, looked generally Greek. Within the Greek-looking buildings, architects were free to create some new elements and designs that helped them to solve problems of space, material, and function in order to produce buildings with highly aesthetic appearance. The Alexandrian particularities are the optical refinements as seen in Mustafa Kemal I, moldings of large dimensions with simple articulated profiles as seen in the examples from Komildeka area, the combination of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian elements, including the chyma recta, chyma reversa, and Lisbian chymation at the same one corniche, the square dentils with VI equal to the width, the replacement of mutile with modillions. Throughout the 3rd century BC, individual Egyptian elements such as the Sphinx, the solar sun disk, and the curved pediments were added to the Alexandrian architectural styles to express the particularities of the Alexandrian society as a society that incorporates Greek inhabitants neighbored with the Egyptian who hold a deeply rooted history of religious and funerary beliefs, which were reflected profoundly in their architecture. By the end of the 3rd century and beginning of the 2nd century BC onward, Egyptian elements increasingly found their way to the decoration and moldings of funerary architecture as well as in fragments of non-funerary context until they became part of the overall layout of the architecture of Alexandria. The Egyptian broken lintel led to the use of more varied forms of entablatures like the broken and half pediments, which led to the creation of what can be termed as the Alexandrian Baroque architecture. This interaction of Greco-Egyptian elements seems to have a more profound background of cultural and social changes that might have been accompanied with a change in the funerary and religious practices in the city. The religious content and connotations of the Egyptian elements used in architecture became more appreciated among the Greeks, the Greek inhabitants of the city, if not adopted by the majority of them. From the 2nd half of the 2nd century onward, more Egyptian elements have been introduced into the decorative designs of Alexandrian entablatures of civil buildings, as well as the doorways and frames of niches inside the tombs and their accessories, that is to say the stele and locally closing slabs. They created a new Egyptian atmosphere that is well integrated into an Alexandrian context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mona Hakak. I just wanted to make a small comment. Do you agree with this idea, this labeling of Alexandrian architecture as being eclectic and also early Baroque? Do you agree with this description of eclecticism?
I think the beginning of Baroque styles have their origins here in this variation of segmental and Greek elements in one entablature. And this didn't happen anywhere else before Alexandria.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's my pleasure to end this session by calling on Dr. Kyriakos Savopoulos, who is a research fellow and tutor of the Faculty of Classics at Oxford University, more particularly in Queen's College, to speak to us on a very interesting subject, I think as interesting as the previous one on the origins of Baroque architecture in antiquity, because it became a dominant style in the Roman Empire. But I think this also is very interesting because we know that Egypt produced a great number of papyri and evidence-based papyri, but we are not perhaps aware of the immense amount of epigraphy. There is a huge project to create a corpus of Ptolemaic inscriptions, and Dr. Kyriakos Savopoulos will speak to us about this effort.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues and friends, it's a great honor to be part of this conference, and I would like to address a special meaning for me as I passed. Which of all? All of them. Is it better? Better. Okay. So, I was about to say that first of all, I'm very happy to see my academic family after some years. I mean, the Alexandrian academic family. And this conference means a lot to me as I passed the first 5 years of my academic life in Alexandria from 2009 to 2013. And I think we have so many stories to share with all of you these difficult years. And so today I represent Oxford University in a long project that started in 2013. So this is the machinery. So our project is called Corpus of Ptolemaic Inscriptions. And actually our aim is to provide for the first time a full corpus of up-to-date Greek and bilingual text on stone from Ptolemaic Egypt. This idea, actually our inspiration for this project was the work done by a renowned scholar and member of the British Academy and of course authority in the study of Ptolemaic Egypt, Peter Marshall Fraser. I think you are familiar with this name. So after his work that was done in the 1960s, we thought of that's the right point that we should provide the full corpus. So the project initiated in late 2013, we expect to finish within 2018, resulting both in a book, actually 3 volumes, book and a website free of access in Oxford University website. So, just some more details regarding this project. So, Peter Fraser collected in the late 1960s about 350 inscriptions. And actually, he intended, he promised to All Souls College to provide the corpus of Ptolemaic inscriptions. Then he changed his mind and he focused in Alexandria, producing, I think, his well-known volume, Ptolemaic Alexandria, published in 1972. Of course, since then, there were more discoveries that we have to include. So today we have reached a total number of 620 inscriptions, also including some categories that were initially excluded by Peter Fraser. So this is the kind of material he left to us in the Center for the Study of Ancient Documents, where I belong now. So we have his manuscripts with a lot of notes that were so hard to transcribe and understand, actually. His handwriting is like a doctor, like a physician. And also we have a series of squeezes. And of course, they belong to, I think, to the largest collection of squeezes that I know in the world. And a series of photographs. I think this is the most precious gift that Fraser left to us. Of course, in terms of content, first of all, I would like to say that more than 65 sites are represented in our project, starting from Alexandria to the bottom of Dodekaskinos, present-day Aswan. And in terms of text, in terms of types of text categories, you see that we have a great variety, including decrees and edicts and royal letters of all kinds, and of course dedications of all kinds, including ordinary humans up to gods and kings or deified kings, and metrical text for the first time, something that was excluded by Fraser, and funerary monuments and others. Sorry. Actually, metrical text means it's poems, actually. Poems, yeah. So funerary epigrams also. So while dealing with the main body of the corpus, we had the opportunity to do some side projects. One of them was the full republication of the Ptolemaic inscriptions of the Philae obelisk today in Dorset in Kingston Lacy, that was transferred from Philae to UK during the 18th century, I think. So by applying the RTI technology, which is a sort of retrospective imaging, we're able to reveal more fragments of the text, so we had to provide a new publication of it. Then we're mostly keen to find as update as possible images, taking into account that the Greco-Roman Museum is closed. So it was difficult to come in contact with the original stones. In this respect, I have to thank Professor Amperer. He was one of the very first to provide us colored photos. That was important to us to find color in those photos. Then we digitized the archive of Etienne Bernard, who was also a well-known scholar in the study of Ptolemaic epigraphy. So during this process of searching for new images and also traveling throughout the valley in sites, we were able to find a series of new evidence or unknown evidence that we had to present. But before that, there was a conference in 2015 regarding Ptolemaic epigraphy that we expect to have by 2018 in printed form. And then in an article of in the periodical ZPE, which is specialized in epigraphy, in number 200, we had a series of inscriptions, new. And I think the most interesting of all, and I think I will be the very first to read this name, we rediscovered for a second time an inscription that was found by Flinders Petrie in Saqqara, in Memphis, in the site of the Serapeum. That stone was donated then to the Ashmolean Museum by Flinders Petrie. It was lost. It was refound by Fraser. He took a squeeze, and then it was lost again. So we found the squeeze, and we said, this stone should be somewhere. So we spent a couple of months, our Christmas, I think, also there, and we finally got the stone. So we're very careful in terms of paleography. We're very careful not to create another myth. I was not responsible, actually, for the paleographical aspect of it. It was Charles Crowther from our team. And we think, seriously, that is the first certified case related to Alexander the Great. And since we talk about the site of Saqqara, the site of the Serapeum, then it's a guess. A term that starts with the letters alpha and P would be possible to be Apis. We have no chance to find the rest of the inscription. As you see, it's a fragmentary inscription. There were more blocks to the left and to the right. So I think, anyway, the name is there. The lettering is fine and well justified as being not ordinary and not a modest stone. For more information, please have a look to the publication. I would like to comment more on this because my topic is different. So this is our team. We are headed by a very known papyrologist, Professor Alan Bowman. And actually, as you see, all of them are well-known people. So we combine more than one specializations and disciplines in order to provide an as comprehensive as possible view to the study. Now, my talk today is related, my case study, to Alexandrian citizens in this corpus of Ptolemaic epigraphy. And when we talk about citizens, we mean people who care to include an Alexandrian toponymic in the inscriptions that are involved. So we find Alexandria not only in the capital, but also in several sites around the Egyptian Cora, and also many of them abroad, outside Egypt, in the so-called spheres of influence of the Ptolemaic Empire. So, unfortunately, the evidence is not balanced, or not balanced as would be expected for a city, a Greek city like Athens, for example. So we have not much material in terms of quantities, but I think the quality matters, first of all, and second, there are other categories, as you see, like related to civic institutions or to legal issues that are completely missing, actually, lacking. Yet we have a lot of dedications involving gods and kings in many combinations, several combinations, and also there is a very strong public aspect to it anyway. So this is what we're going to review. We're going to review a few case studies because we don't have time to discuss everything. What I would like to say that this material has never been studied systematically. It has been used or misused unconditionally in discussions that epigraphy, and this kind of epigraphy that we're going to see, doesn't help. For example, the nature of the Alexandrian citizenship, whether it's graded system or not. So they have been used in purpose by supporting the one or the other argument, most of times unconditionally. So what we want to do in this project, and not only in this case, is to reconsider the material, taking into account, first of all, the double nature of the epigraphic evidence. So epigraphy, as we understand, at least in Egypt, is not just text like papyri, it's also a monument, and the archaeological context is equally important to understand the nature of the text. So in terms of toponymics, we find three kinds of toponymics referring to Alexandria. So we have the demesmen, So people that identify themselves by the name of their dean, that they belong, we have a few dozens certified in Alexandria. An interesting point that might lead somewhere is that we have not found in epigraphy the same demos mentioned twice. So, an idea that I would like to follow in this talk that would be a representative dedication or mentioning instead of being just an individual, an open question. Then we have the Alexandrians, people who identify themselves just with the term Alexandrians without the name of the demos. And then in a very few cases, we have the term Astos or Asti, but there's only one or two, but I had to include it anyway. So in the previous scholarship, there was an early doctrine, early 20th century doctrine, the so-called model of the graded citizenship, that these three different categories represent different statuses of citizenship. Yet this is not true. The material never supported this idea. Papyrology claims just the opposite. And I have to add also that these models were mostly inspired by the modern colonial society models. We see reflections of this in this understanding. So we just abandon the idea and we see the true information, the actual information. What do they want to say to us? And this is definitely not the nature of the Alexandrian citizenship. And here's my very first example, a very frequently discussed stone. It's situated in the site of the Serapeon. Someone had the brilliant idea to include it in the base of the Diocletian column, known also as Pompey Pillar, I don't know who. Yet it's a statue of Arsinoe, Philadelphos. Her name is written, as we see, in accusative. And the dedicator is a person called Thestor, son of Satyrus. So scholars, and I would say mostly inspired from Athens, they saw this as a simplified version of a honorific inscription. And because the fantasy in Alexandria always goes too far, they have seen that this guy has been granted citizenship, and this is why he dedicates this statue. Yet the question is it really a honorific inscription in the way that we understand? So looking to the rest of the epigraphic evidence, and more specifically to honorific statue bases, we see that one way or another, the reason for someone to be honored is mentioned or is implied. So someone is benevolent, a king would be benevolent, or someone would have goodwill towards the king, or a doctor of a king is a proper case for someone to be honored. And of course, all of these people are mentioned in accusative. Yet, also in Egypt, and I'm sure this is not only Egypt, accusative is used in inscribed bases also to imply the actual media. For instance, here we have, to your left, we have a certain Archibios who dedicated, as he says, the Hercules. And he means the statue of Hercules, of course. Then, next to us, next to him, we have another Alexandrian member of the Epiphanios demos. So Dorion, dedicated to God Apollo, the god, and the shrine of it. And he means the statue of the god. And I think if we go even a wider context, we see the same use of accusative in the foundation deposits of the Alexandrian Serapeon. So we read here that King Ptolemy, son of Ptolemy and Arsinoe, god Philadelphia, dedicated to Serapis the temple and the sanctuary, again in accusative. And I think this is how we should read this inscription, that the statue depicts Arsinoe and is dedicated by this Alexandrian. Now, regarding the statue, this is something also we need to consider. It's not any type of statue, and Arsinoe is not any kind of queen. She represents the first case of a deified Ptolemaic queen with the most prominent individual royal cult in Alexandria that remained important throughout the Ptolemaic period. Is the first queen to be introduced in every temple, major temple of the country, either Greek or Egyptian or any kind, and to be Sinaos, to be temple-sharing deity, with all major deities included in the Ptolemaic kingdom. And we should consider this case seriously. For example, in the case of the Serapeum that we have found statues of Arsinoe and also an altar for the cult of gods Adelphoi, so for Arsinoe and her husband, brother. Then there is evidence for another temple dedicated to her and Zeus to the east side of the city, that we traditionally think the Greek side of the city, while there is evidence for at least a cultic spot in another temple to the west-north side of the city, in this time shared with Ammon. Our statue base, although today exists in the Alexandria Serapeum, has been discovered in the city center at the feet of the French fortress, so which is the hill of Comeldica. Actually, we deal with a cult statue that was dedicated by Thestor to one, probably, of the main major temples there. I would say, if you want me to guess, an Alexandrian-style guess, why not in her own temple in Arsinoion that we know that existed there, according to ancient sources. As for the status of this person, of Thestor, I think he is not someone who was just being granted with citizenship, or even some others have seen him as a lower-graded Alexandrian who is not full terms Alexandrian because he doesn't mention his demos. Instead, we talk about a person who reached such a prominence that he was able to afford, and also he was allowed to dedicate a royal statue in the heart of the city. And the term Alexandria in this respect goes beyond the borders of a demos. He represents the city. And this idea could be supported also by the rest of the case studies I have included for you. And this has to do with the role of Alexandrians and the duties of Alexandrian citizens towards their kings. We have a series of dedications, and actually this is the majority of the dedications we have from the 3rd century BC. We hardly have any other type, that are headlined with this formula that you see, Hyper Basileos Ptolemeo, which means on behalf of the king. So looking a couple of slides back, if you remember the deposits from the Alexandrian Serapeum, we see that Ptolemy III was the founder of the main Ptolemaic temple. Meanwhile, of course, there was a temple and before him, made by Ptolemy II. Meanwhile, we find another person who is an important courtman, and is called Archagathos, the governor of Libya. He's also the grandson-in-law of Ptolemy Soter. So we see a major figure of the Ptolemaic court founding an annex of it, somewhere to the south of the city, a temple to Serapis and Isis. And then if we see it in a pyramid-style shape, having the king on top, and then you have the courtmen, then you have Alexandrians who express their loyalty to the policies of the kings by accepting their new gods, the new official gods of Alexandria. So on behalf of King Ptolemy, we see Nicanor and Nicadoros dedicate to Serapis and Isis and declare that are members of the Polydefkios Demos. Again, my feeling is that they represent, symbolically at least, the Demos. The same formula continues also to the reign of Ptolemy IV, where we have truly a systematic promotion of Serapis and Isis. We see two of the dedications that they use two different kinds of toponymics. To the left side, we see Diodotos and his sons are called Alexandrians, and in the other case, we see that they use the demon's name. And actually, the formula and the whole structure of the text is identical. The only difference is the actual toponymic that they use. Otherwise, I think the text itself doesn't help, and just to repeat again, any kind of graded system in the Alexandrian citizen body. Then, again, more important information that it has been ignored, and I think can be connected to major political events anyhow. So in the right case, we see that the dedicator, Archepolis, dedicates to Serapis and Isis the savior gods. And there are at least two temples in the city of Alexandria founded by Ptolemy IV that dealing with these capacities of Serapis and Isis as savior gods. Now, both historians and archaeologists widely believe, that the savior identity of Serapis and Isis has to do with the Battle of Raphia that was victorious for the Ptolemies, and according to ancient sources, the role of Serapis was decisive. I don't know how they understood that anyway. So, in that respect, that we see that Ptolemy has decided to promote Serapis as savior god, not only in Alexandria. Too many controls, sorry. So, going back to the Serapion, he dedicated in the Serapion, there was already a temple there, so he dedicated Harpocration, a small shrine dedicated to Harpocrates, but as he says, κατά πρόσταγμα Σαράπηδος και Είσοδος, after being ordered by Serapis and Isis. And then we can see that this order was transferred once more to the citizen body, because not only they mention that in Alexandria, but they have traveled, they've been appointed to travel across the country. They even reached Philae, where we have another Alexandrian member of the Hephaestos that time, Demos, dedicating to Serapis and Isis in a temple of Isis saviors, while another guy, Mikagoras, in West, somewhere in West Delta, dedicated to Serapis and Isis, these saviors, and those who provide and give many. Yet, they also provide us another major information, how Greek Alexandrians would receive Serapis and Isis. And he simply explains that Serapis is like Dionysos and Isis is like Aphrodite, as simple as that. The role of the Alexandrians as being appointed by the kings to certain cultural and of public nature activities is certified as in the most monumental way by a series of dedications made by this Alexandrian called I think Agathodorus, right? Yes. In the area of Fayum at the time of Ptolemy the 8th Euergetes II. So he has been sent by the king to inaugurate a new phase in the local temple. He also explains that, what he did exactly. That he dedicated the propylon, so the gateway and the causeway to God Pneferos, the great God, so and so and so. Ex voto, again in accusative. I can't find the... And this is how it used to be, this propylon. This is what he meant. The whole structure has been transferred from Fayum to Alexandria, and this is how it used to be in the courtyard of the Greco-Roman Museum. And I think we all agree that we look forward to see it back to its place one day before we die. So, and also Professor Ampere provided me with this very rare case, which is one of the doors, the wooden doors that survived. You know, that's the miracle of the desert, can preserve anything. So, of course, I don't have time for more case studies. I just would like to close as an epilogue with two inscriptions from those that we're going to deal in CPI Program 2, which starts next year, and it will be Ptolemaic inscriptions outside Egypt. And we see here that Alexandrians have been used in high posts of the empire. We see a person of someone who is called Ptolemaeus, son of Ptolemaeus, who is also a kinsman, symbolically speaking, of course, and he has also a major office, and of course he's not a priest in the way that we understand, this is a civic office, and Strategos, governor of the island, and we see that he still assumes to be an Alexandrian in order to imply that has been sent directly from the court, while another guy, another series of guys, we find them in Santorini, in the island of Thera, as that was also a very important naval base for the Ptolemies. More conclusions, of course, there will be in the paper. For the moment, I would like to close with two basic impressions I got. First of all, the Alexandrian society, at least as represented by these citizens, is not a matter of subject. They're not subjects to the king. They're companions to the kings, to the Alexandrian kings and their policies. And then, looking these kind of inscriptions coming from around the Mediterranean, I understand that this city, in terms of society, must have been the archetype in real life of the Hellenistic oikoumeni. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now this closes the papers of the session. I would like to ask whether there are any questions. If so, we must be very fast to try and regain a little time. Are there any questions? Yes, there is one question. Please. Could you stand up, please? And there is a microphone there.
Yes, to Dr. Savopoulos, I would like to ask how do you explain the supplement Alexandros Api? How do you explain perhaps apisti?
Apis is the god.
Of the apimi, the verb is apimi. Or do you have another explanation? The first, as a second one, not to save your time. Another, I completely agree that these inscriptions you mentioned in the middle of your presentation are honorific because we have exactly the same expression, kataretin και εύνοιαν, in rhetorical inscriptions published by Dodd, and also in rhetorical texts. We have exactly the same. So, personally, I am fully convinced. But I would like to explain me, if possible, how do you translate this api? Is that the correct supplement, or we have to think about another supplement? Thank you.
Probably I haven't been clear. Talking about Apis, Apis is a god. Apis is the god to whom the Serapeum of Memphis was dedicated. So it's a bull. It's a god in the form of a bull. In late 4th century and early 3rd century epigraphy in Egypt, we find many times that instead of Apidi, so Apis is the name anyway, so could be Apidi in dative, but we find also the epsilon iota used even in the Sarapi. So we say not always Sarapidi, but we say also Sarapi. So that's why the reconstruction Apidi or Api, because we're not a dative. Yes, it is a dative of a certain god who is the god of Memphis and the god who became Sarapis. It's Osiris Apis that was transliterated in Greek to Sarapis.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I will give you all a wonderful opportunity to have a little coffee or tea.